So we are continuing. This is our second shir in the Kuzari. And to remind us, for those of us who don't really remember what happened last time, the book begins with a king, the king of the Khazars. And the king has a recurring dream where an angel appears to him and tells him, your actions are good. Your intention is good, but your actions are not. Your intentions are good. You want to do the right thing, but what you're doing is not. And so he tries even harder with following the religion, the pagan religion of the Khazars, and the dream continues, and he gets to a point where he understands that he needs to do something different. And he decides to call upon different, let's call it for now, religious leaders, to come and explain to him their religious beliefs. And the first person he invites was a philosopher. We talked a little bit why a philosopher is not such a good idea. Because today we don't really see a philosopher as a religion. Philosophy is really not a religion. It is a different process. But in the time of Yehuda Halevi, we're talking about going back to the 12th century, it appears that philosophy, or at least what we would call philosophy in the Middle Ages in this period, did hold certain concepts about religion, about God. And therefore, they have a seat at the table when we're coming to talk about religion. If you can close that door, we would really appreciate it. And so he said, we believe in a God, or our God. He says, God does not have a will, doesn't have hatred, he doesn't want anything, doesn't need anything. Nothing of your dream fits with any of what we are teaching. And he says that the world was not created. The world always existed. And every human being came from another human being. This is just a summary from last time. And that there is a series of causes. And God is the first cause the second cause, which caused the third cause, the fourth, fifth, all the way to our existence and everything that exists. But that was done always. God is the first cause always. There wasn't a time where the universe did not exist. And that's where we left off last time. And he says to him, he says also, V'adam HaShalem, the perfect human being, that is a human being that reached his full potential, would connect to a divine light. Divine light. In Arabic, it's called Amar Ilahi. Here in the translation, they call it Or Eloki. But he says that divine light is called by some in philosophy, it's called the active or agent intellect. If you're interested in what the agent intellect is, it is a force in the universe that brings forth the ability of human beings to think. Now you might say, but why do we need such a thing? Well, there's a principle in Aristotle that nothing can lift itself up from the bootstraps. So if you are passive, which means that your mind is not thinking, you can't make yourself think. There must be something that makes that which is passive become active. And only something active can make something passive turn active. Does that make sense to you? Does that make sense? And so the question was, how does a human being think? There are times that we're not thinking, right? Just like when I'm looking at your faces now and you're like this. Okay? So there's something that needs to trigger that ability to start, that your mind starts to work, right? That squirrel starts running around that wheel and then, fires up the energy. and all of a sudden you have a eureka moment, you have an idea. Well, the philosopher said that the seichel hapoel, the active or ancient intellect, connects to the human intellect, and once it's connected to the human intellect, the human being is able to contemplate, or contemplate is a fancy word for thinking. And what would he be thinking about? This is called universal ideas. Ideas that are true everywhere in the universe. Okay, so anything about history, that's not universal. Anything about what's happening with the weather, it's not universal. The ability to think universal ideas, things that are unchanging, that is the ultimate goal of philosophy. Not to study things that are in constant change, but to find what is constant in the universe. For example, that a statement cannot be both true and false at the same time is universally true, everywhere, at any time. Or that the whole cannot be greater than the sum of the parts. Right? That's true everywhere in the universe. That's true any time in the universe. So a lot of the examples I can give you are what we would say in geometry or mathematics, because they're easy to understand. Because we know that a triangle, right, the sum of interior angles of a right triangle is always 180. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Ukraine or in Kirstir or whether you're in Lakewood. Now, it might be in Norway, it's different.
Not Norway, Finland.
I said Norway. I didn't. Why did I have to say Finland? Do I have to say Finland?
Yeah.
Okay, how did you guys do in this Eurovision business?
I don't know.
Okay, good. I'm glad. The fact that you didn't know, that's already a good thing. So he says that the seichel, our human intellect, connects or is connected to seichel hapoel, and then it becomes, your body becomes tools for the seichel hapoel. So what he's describing, the philosopher is describing what we would call sort of a mystical experience, where the human intellect connects to the divine intellect and become one, thereby that our body essentially becomes a tool for the divine intellect. Talking about a very, very high level of connection. And he says that once that happens, when a person reaches that level of perfection, he could have this experience over and over again. Okay? Now, so he says the nefesh then, the soul, once that happens, becomes close to an angel. It becomes angelic. That is, it becomes on a higher level than the physical body, and because of it's connected to the seichel hapoel, it allows us to reach a higher level of spiritual awareness. And he explains that angels, just so that we have an understanding what an angel is, an angel is a being that is incorporeal. Incorporeal means it's not in a body. It's just a spirit. It's not in a physical body. So your soul is in a body, right? It's inside, however we understand that. But an angel cannot have a physical form. Now we can get into the question of, well, what are you going to do with the angels that appeared to Avraham Avinu and in the burning bush and all those type of questions. But right now the philosopher is explaining not Judaism, he's explaining his natural religion, which is that angels do exist, but they are spiritual entities that do not have a manifestation in a body. And now he says, the angels are separate intellects. They're like intellects separated from the body or matter. They are eternal. What does it mean eternal? It means they always exist. And they will never cease to exist. And that when the nefesh of the human being connects to the ancient intellect, then the person will not feel his body withering away. Sort of the way that we become immortal is where the nefesh, the human being's nefesh, becomes one with the ancient or active intellect. And that union is in a way of us achieving immortality. And he says, once this happens, you get this while you're still alive. You don't have to wait till you're dead. And you enter the company of Hermes, Asclepius, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. All of those people were able to perfect themselves, perfect their intellect, their morals, their body, so that they can connect with the ancient intellect and become one with it, and they achieved immortality while being alive. Okay?
They died.
But they achieved it already.
Like they were executed.
No, Plato wasn't executed. Aristotle wasn't executed. Socrates decided he was given a way out. He could have escaped from prison, but he decided to drink the hemlock, to drink the poison, because he wanted to protest what they were doing to him. That's true, but the other ones were not executed.
And still not eternal.
Why not? Eternal existence doesn't mean physical existence. Plato actually writes that the way to achieve becoming immortal, right, or eternal, immortal, is one, have children. Second, write a book. So if you write a book, you could become eternal, because then your book, people are studying and learning it, and you always exist. And if you have kids and they have kids and they have kids, so that you continue to exist. But we're talking about a different type of immortality, a different level of existence. Now, he says, now, when you do this, you perfect your intellect and your morality and your body, that you become one with the seichel hapoel, with the active intellect. That, in a metaphorical way, is called the will of God. But it's not that God has a particular will. It's up to you. You want to do this, do it. You don't want to do it, you don't do it. God doesn't have wants or needs. So therefore, he says, you should really pursue things according to the truth. This whole dream of yours, essentially what he's telling the king, is nonsense. You have a dream where God is coming to you and telling you you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing. That's not going to happen. You should really learn the truth so that your intellect will be fully actualized rather than passive. Our intellect goes from passive to active, passive to active. That's what happens. But you can get to a level, that's what says the philosopher, that you are active all the time. Now, obviously when a person is sleeping, that's not the case. But he's talking about there's a way that you could connect to this path of life. And this path of life requires you to live a moral life. And we see that the philosophers are very much interested in morality. Plato wrote about morality. Aristotle wrote about morality. A lot of the Muslim philosophers and some of the Jewish philosophers wrote about morality. And so we know that it's a big component of philosophy. Even till this day, there's a field in philosophy called ethics. Now, there are disagreements with them, but they certainly are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to discover the principles of what is ethical or moral living. Okay? For us, we have the Torah, so we don't have to work too hard. In a sense, Rav Saadia Gaon says that the Torah really for us was a shortcut. God did a huge chesed with us and says, here. But if we didn't have the Torah, we would have to do it on our own. We would have to work very hard to discover the rules of morality and how to build a just society without the Torah. And we would need to end at the same place. Okay? And so, he says, the goal of your life, says the philosopher to the king, is to emulate, to be like the active or ancient intellect. So that you should live. What? I saw your lips moving, sorry. That you should live in humility and submission with good midot, and that is the goal of your life. That you should emulate, live your life as close to becoming a fully actualized intellect like the Seichel HaPoel. And he says, now, when you think about this type of belief, then you should not be worried about what type of service to do to God. Should you offer sacrifices or should you pray? Should you do dancing or should you do, I don't know what, make statues? All those sort of things, he says, really don't matter. They don't matter. God doesn't really care about all this stuff. He says, this is all, you shouldn't really worry about all these things of how to pray, how to praise, what can you say, what language to say, and what actions. He says, you can make up your own religion. Make up whatever you want. You could make up any religion so that as long as you continue to live with good midos, good moral virtues, and that you manage your household and your nation in a way that promotes ethical living. And then he says, now, if you have a particular religion, you can keep it, just adjust it to the teachings of the philosophers. That's pretty much it. Or he says, so you can follow the philosophers' religions, or he says, the whole goal is purification of your nefesh. What to do externally? What do you want to do? You want to go to a synagogue, you want to go to a mosque, you want to go to a church, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. As long as you understand what the goal is, which is to purify the soul, to develop the intellect in order to connect to the active or agent intellect. That's the goal. And he says when you do that, it's possible that the agent intellect will provide you with prophecy. That this divine intellect would provide you with information about what will happen and guide you in your life through true dreams and images of your imaginations that were based on the truth. That's what he tells them. So in a sense he says, listen, I don't understand what you're telling me about God wanting you to change your life. It doesn't work that way. You should invest in your moral character, learn high-level mathematics, logic, physics, metaphysics, right? All of the philosophical subjects that existed at the time, connect to the agent intellect, and that's it. Live a good life. That contradicts the spiritual experience that the king has. Because the king has an experience that tells him that God wants him to change his actions. And the philosopher here comes and tells him, you don't need to change anything. And so he says, the king says, your words make sense. I understand what you're saying. But they're not in agreement and congruence with what I am looking for. Because I know that my soul is pure. And all my will is to do the will of God. That's what I want to do in life. I want to do whatever makes God happy. And therefore, I was told through my dreams, that my actions are not wanted by God. That what I'm doing is not what He wants. So therefore, there's something There's something. And he says, maybe the solution for this is looking at the two religions that divided the world between them and are fighting one another, which is Christianity and Islam. And he says, they are the ones that are fighting against one another, and that in each one of them serves God with pure intention, and they fast, and they pray, and they do very similar things, and then yet they go out to the battlefield in order to kill one another. This is, as I told you on the first shir, that this was at the time of the Crusades, where the Muslims and the Christians were fighting. And so the king doesn't understand that exactly. He says, this person, these people are sitting over here doing praying and supplications and learning the Bible and learning everything, and then they are going to go kill these people who are doing the same thing. They're fasting and praying and learning their spiritual text, and they're going to kill these people. He doesn't understand why this is happening. And he says, and each one of them believes that if they die during the battle, what would happen? They would be in Gan Eden. They will enter the Garden of Eden. And he says, but they can't be that they're both right. That doesn't make sense. That's what he tells the philosopher. The philosopher says, according to the religion of the philosophers, this one doesn't have the permission, nor the other one, to kill other people. Why? Because the whole purpose of human existence is to connect to the intellect. That's what they should be working on, not killing other people. That's not going to get you anywhere closer to understanding the truth in the universe. It's not. So, the king says to the philosopher, or says to himself, so it appears that according to the philosophers, both of these religions are wrong. That is, they're making a big mistake. Why? Because those two religions, Christianity and Islam, believe that the world was created, right? And the philosopher said the world was eternal, not created. And they believe that the world was created in 6 days. And they also believe that the first cause of the philosophers, they believe that that first cause, which is we call God, speaks to people. Whereas the philosopher says, God doesn't speak to people. It has nothing to do with you. He doesn't even know you exist. And the philosophers believe that God doesn't know any individuals. Much higher level than anything that we've seen. And according to the philosophers and their information, their knowledge, they pursue the truth. What we would expect, says the king, is that prophets, you would find prophets among the philosophers. But you don't find prophets among the philosophers, you find prophets among who? The Christians and the Muslims. That's what their claim is. And so, even though they're connected to the world of the divine intellect, they don't really do miracles. They don't have prophetic messages from God of what should happen. Not at all. And that we see that actually the people who don't study philosophy, the people who don't work on purification of their soul, are the ones that are receiving prophecy. Just exactly the opposite of what you're saying. And so he says it must be that the divine light that you mentioned, this Amar Ilahi, this Inyana Eloki, it says in the Hebrew, must be different than the way that you explained it. It can't be that this way. And so the philosopher leaves, and the king says to himself, I shall invite the Christians and the Muslims, because in one of these two religions there must be the answer to what I'm looking for. Now, he says, I will not invite the Jews. Why not? He says, because they are the lowest, the smallest, and the most hated. Because of these three reasons, there's no reason to bring Jews to the conversation. That situation hasn't changed, right? This book is 12th century. We are now in the 21st century. That hasn't changed, right? We're still lowest, smallest, and hated, as you could see from what's happening on college campuses around the world. It's no joke. It's a very, very serious situation that's happening around us. This is almost going back to the 1930s, that Jews were kicked out of universities because simply they were Jews. And so the king says, okay, Christians, Muslims, flips a coin, guess who he brings first?
Christians.
What?
Muslims.
Why? Why do you say he'll bring the Muslims first?
It just seems more in line with the story.
More in line with the story to bring a Muslim. They're more recent.
Yeah.
But you went with the Christians.
Yeah, but like I saw that you regarded his answer as the correct one. So.
No, actually he brought the Christians first. Don't, you see, don't stick strong. So now, you should know that in many editions of the Kuzari, the description of Christianity and the refutation of it has been altered. Why? So it's something that you need to know about Jewish texts. Jewish texts, in order to be printed, had to be cleared by censorship. There were people who, many of them were former Jews that converted to Christianity, would go over the book and take out things that they felt was not respectable about their religion. And there's sections of this part talking about Christianity that was removed in many of the editions of the Kuzari. So if you buy a traditional Kuzari and you read the Christianity section, it's missing a few things. In this edition, because they printed it in Israel, they don't need censorship, and so they put it back in. It's very, very interesting. Based on the Arabic, obviously. Now, so he calls one of the sages of the Christians, and he asked him about his Torah, his written text, his teachings, his actions, and this is what he said. I believe in that all existence are created, and that the eternal is the only one eternal being, and that is the Creator, right? Calling him God. That he created the world in 6 days, and I believe that all human beings are the descendants of Adam, who came after that from Noah, which is essentially the story of the book of Genesis, and they are all related to Noah. I believe that God watches over people and connects with people, and that he has anger, will, and mercy. And he speaks to his prophets and his pious ones by appearing before them, and that he brought his presence upon a people that he chose. And he says, the general rule is, I believe everything that it says in the Torah and in the books of the Jewish people. These are miraculous events that cannot be rejected because they were well known, occurred over a long period of time, and were done in front of multitudes. Okay? So that's what the Christian says. He says, now, but in the end of their days, the last generation of the Jewish people, the prophecy of God came true, that what? That God became human in the flesh. Okay? That God took a human form in the body of a virgin from a Jewish family, and she gave birth to him. He was revealed, he looked human, but in hiddenness he was divine. He was the sent prophet, and also the God that sends prophet. He is the Messiah, and we call him the Son of God, and he is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's what the Christian explains to him. He says, and then we believe in that God is really one, even though we refer to God as three. Which is true. All of this there's nothing here that I think Christians would not agree with. He is providing, Rabbi Levi is providing an accurate description of what Christianity is. And he says, we believe that this Messiah resided in the Jewish people, and after they rejected the Messiah and crucified him, the anger of God fell upon them, and that the will of God was to rest upon those who followed his Messiah. And since other nations started following that Messiah, then God's providence went to watch over them. And we are of those nations, although we are not of the seed of the Jewish people, of Bnei Israel, but we are called Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Although we're not genetically, but because we follow the teachings of the Bible, we are the true Israel. Because we follow after the Messiah and his disciples, who were all Jewish. They were 12 that came to replace the tribes, the 12 tribes, and that many other Jews followed the 12 disciples, and they were the kernel to set up, to establish the Christian community, and they became known as at the level of Bnei Israel. And we succeeded, we spread throughout the lands, and that all of the nations are called to this religion and are commanded to follow its commandments, which is what? To praise the Messiah, to praise the cross upon which he was crucified, and so on. And they have to follow the teachings of Peter, who was one of the disciples. And we follow, our laws are in the Torah. What says Shimon? So it might be, Shimon might be, I think Shimon is Peter. And we study the Torah all the time, and we accept that it was given by God, because it says in the New Testament, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew, I have not come to remove any mitzvahs of the law, but rather to strengthen them and to make sure that we follow them. That's a quote from the book of Matthew that Yehuda Levi brings. It's interesting that this quote also appears in Maseches Shabbos. It is though I've only seen one line quoted ever from the New Testament in the Gemara, and that's this line. It's very, very interesting. And it's quoted in Aramaic, by the way. So, interesting for those of you who are interested. So the king, you think the king is impressed by this? Of course not.
He's calling Muslims.
So the king says this religion does not leave any room for reason. It's irrational. Makes no sense. Why? He says our reason distances this religion from us. That is, if you think about what the description of Christianity was, it says, it doesn't make any sense. How so? So he says, when something is proven, how do you know something? Think about this. How do you know what you know? So sometimes you know things because you have experienced them. That is, you saw with your own eyes.
Evidence.
Okay, good. But evidence is either through what your senses provide you or your experience. You experience something, right? And so that, when you have an experience or you see something, you have to have some sort of an explanation to explain what's going on. But if you don't know and somebody says something that doesn't make sense, it's going to be much harder for you to accept to be true when the statement doesn't make any reasonable sense. And so he says, this is what the sages of physics did. That is, whatever they saw as spiritual powers, they didn't have really explanations for them. And so they came up with all sorts of explanations that don't really make a lot of sense. Which he's saying to this person, you're telling me that God took a physical form. It doesn't make any sense. God can't take physical forms. Well, it's not really God, it is God. It doesn't make sense here. The story of Christianity says it doesn't make sense because I don't experience it. It doesn't make sense. And therefore he says, these are all new ideas for me. They don't really make sense for me. I have to investigate them. And I'm going to continue forward. And so he turns to one of the sages of Islam and asks him about his teachings and his actions. And he says, we believe in the unity of God and his eternality, that God is eternal, and that the world was created, and that all human beings are related to Adam and to Noah. Sounds familiar? That's exactly what the Christians were saying. So far, check, check, check. But we believe that the God is completely removed from any physicality, period. That's where the difference is between Christianity and Islam. And if you find anything in the lashon, in the language of the Quran, that seems to hint a physical quality to God, it is only a metaphor, and we will explain it in a way to show you that it's just a metaphor. I think people want to join us for Mincha. And he says, not only that, we are claiming that our book, the Quran, is the Word of God. It is a wondrous book that we have to accept it because of the miraculous nature of this book, because nobody can write such a book, and not even one verse of the Quran. Nobody could write such a thing, which is what the Quran says in the second surah. And so, our prophet is the seal of all prophets, and he cancels any teaching, any scripture that was written before it, and he calls all nations to join Islam, to accept Islam. And the person who believes, his spirit and body will enter the Garden of Eden, and there he will have pleasure, and he will have everything that he would need from food and drinks, any physical pleasures. And if one rejects God, then they will end up in Gehenna, in eternal fire, and his suffering will never end. So let's stop here with Islam, and we'll continue tomorrow, Emil Hashem, on how the king relates to that. Thank you.